my plan is to next year only do Little Feat shows and not do anything else.
Hoy hoy and welcome. This is special edition with Scott Sharrard, guitarist for Little Feat. Scott's getting real busy, so I was very grateful that he's able to join us today. I've also asked an old friend who's a drummer for the Boat Drunks, but we're here to talk about Little Feat, and I've got questions that I crowdsourced from fans. We'll go through them. And welcome.
Thanks so much, Red, for having me back, and thanks for hitting the record button.
Oh, my goodness. Well, some of this material is going to be things we went over back in March. So this first question came in from a fellow named Davey Stone. Dave asks, how were you hired? How did you hear of the job opening? Did you audition? What were the established members looking for? And any special attraction or affiliation with the group?
Wow, that's a lot of questions. It's a lot of professional questions, and I'm sure, Red, as you know, in the music business, nothing happens in a professional manner. It's all about relationships, if I had to pick one word. And when I was with Gregg Allman from 2008 until he passed away in 2017, and there was a summer, I believe it was the summer of 2015 or so, don't hold me to that. We did a whole summer with the Gregg Allman Band and the Doobie Brothers as a double bill. And of course, Bill Payne has been long associated with the Doobies since their original hits in the studio, but also, has been with them pretty regularly for the last decade or so. I'm not even sure, but with the touring lineup of the band. So I was out there with Bill then, and, lucky for me, Tom Johnston and Pat Simmons from the Doobies saw me play with Gregg, and they invited me up to sit in with them on, I'd say, most of the shows that we played together. I would get up and play a blues shuffle with the Doobie Brothers and Bill. And as thrilled as I was to be hanging with the Doobies, as I've told you before, Red, my favorite bands of the earliest memories of my favorite bands that I saw live and records I fell in love with that I personally related to, were Little Feat and the Allman Brothers. So, being on tour with Gregg and getting to, play with Bill, it was like a dream come true, and I was ready to leave it at that. And then when Gregg passed away, the Doobies really liked our camp, and they brought over our tour manager, Vid, who's actually with Little Feat now, too, just to show you how the relationships work so efficiently in music. And, I worked with Vid the whole time I was with Gregg for almost 10 years, and I love him dearly and still get to work with him. And the Doobies also had Mark Quinones from the Gregg Allman Band they brought over to their band. They brought over our front of house guy, our merch person. And when Paul became ill in 2019 and they had Larry Campbell and Teresa Williams out opening for them, they moved them over into the sub position for Paul while he was, trying to get well. But there were these two shows at the end of the last tour of the 50th anniversary year in November of 2019 that Larry and Teresa could not do. And Bill Payne was on tour with the Doobie Brothers when he was trying to solve this conundrum. And lucky for me, the people he was with at catering and playing shows with were fans and friends of mine. And my name kept coming up. And then sort of the final straw was he started asking the Ramblehorns guys, Jay Collins, Steve Bernstein, and Eric Lawrence, who to get, and my name came up with them. So then Bill was finally like, screw it, I'm going to call Scott. And he called me. I told him, how I felt about the band. I told him about staying up to watch them play Let It Roll on Saturday Night Live when I was a little kid. I had seeing them my whole life, and how I had Waiting for Columbus on cassette, and I actually broke 2 cassettes wearing it out, learning all the parts on the record in my earliest days, and went to do the gig, and the gig ended up being the day that Paul Barrere passed away. And we had a very sort of, and I apologize for the long answer, but I'm trying to hit all the different points in all those different questions. But we ended up having this kind of spiritual bloodletting for Paul on this gig. That's the only way I could describe it as a musician. What we do as musicians is when it's at its best and when it's working, it's very sort of shamanistic. And I would describe that night as one of the most important gigs I've ever played in my life. and that's not for my career. It was really, we were all mourning Paul together. They were his musical brothers. For me, Paul was such a major influence, and I was so honored in the first place to be asked to play a couple shows to fill in for him, but then to be part of this kind of spontaneous memorial service for him. At the end of the gig, it just became obvious to the band that this was how the band was going to go forward.
Wow, that's a great answer to the question. Thank you so much.
I tried to do my best. There was about six in there, but
Larry, you had a question, right?
Yeah, Scott. So the big smile on my face is because this morning I decided, after I made my 8 shots of espresso, that I was like, I want to listen to one of Scott's records, and I did, and pulled up Saving Grace and just finished the whole thing about 10 minutes ago, and wow, it was so fun, and it was so I heard so many influences in your songwriting and in your playing, and so I guess this is the influence question that everybody wants to ask. Besides the obvious, besides Lowell, who you've already mentioned, Paul, who are some of your other influences? Because I hear several, but I don't want to lead the witness.
Well, you mentioned the Saving Grace album, which I'll get to that in a second. Which, as a drummer, I don't know if you managed to find the liner notes online, but there's like 3 of my favorite drummers of all time are on the record. But I'll get into that in a second. But I really grew up. My family is from Michigan, and specifically like the Detroit garage rock scene was my dad's a musician, a singer-songwriter, and I grew up on blues and soul music and rock and roll and jazz and a whole mix of stuff. But I'd say honestly, like, Jimi Hendrix is probably my favorite musician of all time, but I always felt with Hendrix it was totally unattainable. And that's where Lowell George came in. So, not that Lowell George is in any way attainable or matchable in any way, shape, or form, but Lowell was an overweight white guy from the middle class, and that's what I was when I was a little kid. And when I heard him sing and play, with so much soul and fire and such a comprehensive 360 in his writing, playing, and singing of what American roots music was, I kind of made him and Gregg Allman, and at the time also Steve Winwood and Bonnie Raitt. I mean, they became like this rock and roll sound ended up becoming kind of my North Stars. So, but I've always been heavily soul and blues influenced, and I spent my teens touring on the blues, the last vestige of the blues Chitlin circuit in the Midwest when I was a kid. So that's all very much with Saving Grace, the record you listened to today, which was my last solo album. It was a bucket list moment where I had made all these friends in Memphis and Muscle Shoals making records and touring with High Rhythm and Carla Thomas in Memphis, and then at Fame Studios in Muscle Shoals making Southern Blood with Gregg Allman with Rick Hall and his son and Don Was. And when I went to make my solo album Saving Grace, I decided that record is like a love letter to all my heroes from the South and from soul and blues music. And that was the concept of that record. So half of it was cut in Memphis with the High Rhythm section, Howard Grimes on drums, Leroy and Charles Hodges on bass and organ. That's the band on all the High records. Syl Johnson, Ann Peebles, obviously Al Green being the most successful commercially and some of the best of all their records. And I've also toured in Japan with those guys and stuff. So we have like a long history together, with me kind of trying to fill in the role of Teenie Hodges with them. And then on the Muscle Shoals side, we had David Hood and Spooner Oldham from the Swampers on bass and keyboards. And then one of my favorite new drummers, Chad Gamble from Jason Isbell's band, played the role of Roger Hawkins on that. Roger was not well enough to record, and of course, may he rest in peace. He passed away last year. Yeah. And then there's one track, which was a song that Gregg Allman and I wrote that we never got a chance to record together. And I have Bernard Purdie playing drums on that, and Taj Mahal sings that song. It's called Everything a Good Man Needs.
I knew the Taj reference. I didn't realize that was Purdie playing.
I asked Taj to sing it because Gregg and I wrote it, and we never got the chance to record it together. And my first question I asked myself was, well, if I'm going to record this I don't want to sing it. Like, I want to get somebody who Gregg, like one of Gregg's influences, to sing it. And I immediately hit up Taj, and he right away like loved the track and came in and did it for us. It's kind of miraculous how it all lined up. But thanks for listening to the record, man. I'm really proud of it.
Well, I loved every track on it, and they were all different, but they all kind of called up some really fun influences that you mentioned Memphis, and I was hearing some New Orleans stuff. There's a song like the song was in 6/8 that's got like the Fats Domino thing going, and the first cut was like sounded so Alan Toussaint, and I was just blown away. It was like all these different facets. And, like I was hearing Cornell Dupree guitar influences, I think.
He's a huge influence of mine. And that particular record, which we haven't done on every record, that particular record is everything, the lead vocal, the rhythm guitar, and the entire rhythm section were cut live. There's no overdubs. There's no vocal overdubs. There's no rhythm. So I'm playing and singing that whole record live. Well, that's how those guys, Howard Grimes, the great and legendary drummer, who has a great book out about his life now, if anyone wants to find out more about how influential he was in American music in general. When we were cutting, it was one of the biggest compliments that I've ever gotten from anyone, and especially from one of my heroes, was at the end of the session, he just had a smile ear to ear, and he said, this is just like we used to do it back in the day. It feels just like old times with Willie Mitchell. And that was an amazing moment to just know that he felt comfortable and felt like, he made a good record was good enough for me.
At the risk of bogarting the subject a little farther, one of my other main questions was to ask you about influential drummers. I can tell in your playing, you obviously are locked into like a funk thing. You've got that funk sensibility, and joining Little Feat, you've got the Richie Hayward. The ghost of Richie is just in that groove forever. It's like Bonnie said, it's a trench up there when you get to stand up. When Richie was playing in the band, and I'm sure it's gonna continue. But I'm asking, as a drummer, who are some of your influences, or who are you listening?
Well, I'm so happy, Larry, that you picked up on this. I grew up playing the drums, the bass, and the guitar, and Jerry Jamot, when I was playing with him in Gregg Allman's band, and I learned so much from Jerry, he used to call that the tripod for any track. And when I started out, when I was 10, I started by playing the guitar and imitating, what my dad was doing, which was mostly like kind of what I call like the DNA of American music, recorded music. So like Jimmy Reed, Chuck Berry, Bob Dylan, Little Feat songs. Willin' was one of his staple tunes of his set. I started learning guitar that way, and then we had a cheap drum kit and a cheap bass, and I had a 4-track cassette recorder. And ironically, one of the first things I did was I would learn all the parts on records that I loved. So I started with Chuck Berry, Muddy Waters, and then I got into Bad Company, and Little Feat, Waiting for Columbus was the next one. And I used to try to learn the drum, bass, guitar, and vocal parts on the records, and then I would re-record the songs. This is when I was like 12 years old. I would re-record the songs, and I still have these cassettes, by the way. At some point, I should listen to them again. I'm sure they're pretty rough. But I've always been really in tune with this concept of the tripod. And going back, like my favorite, and I'm always in tune with these rhythm sections. I think of music in totality. I don't just think of it as individual instruments. It's really important when you're in a rhythm section to understand space and timing. And if you can play all the instruments, it makes you, even modestly, it makes you so much better at playing your main instrument. And I've continued that. My first solo album, I played drums, bass, and keys on most of the record myself. So I played almost all the instruments on Dawnbreaker, my first solo album. Yeah, drummers, definitely like my top 5 has always been Richie Hayward. I would never put them in order, but the guys like Richie who have that combination of like energy and composition to their playing. So they're not just a timekeeper, they're like a spirit animal. So, right? So Richie, John Bonham, Al Jackson Jr., Zigaboo, from the Meters, Levon Helm, who I got to play with a number of times.
You've played with Clyde Stubblefield, correct?
I played with Clyde. Well, yeah, I mean, anyone could play with Clyde back in the day in the 90s. But yeah, I did play with him at the Globe one time with the house band in Madison, Wisconsin. He had a jam session every Monday. And I went and listened a few times, and then they asked me, I subbed one time for Mel Ford, who's was a huge influence on me as a kid. One of the best guitar players from the Midwest scene in the 90s was Mel. I mean, Clyde had a kick-ass band. Obviously, I mean, Clyde's got to be on the list too. I mean, I guess you can't make it 5, but certainly, I mean, Richie, there's something about the way Richie played that just always, like, every time to this day when I put a Little Feat record on, I cannot stop moving. Even when it's a ballad, even when it's Long Distance Love. It's got those deep soul and New Orleans funk records and all that real Southern stuff. Like, Richie just embodied it in his playing. All the guys in Little Feat did. You know, they're really an anomaly in rock and roll. I feel the same way about the Allman Brothers, and that's why I've always seen them as like related bands. They were American bands that came out at the same time in sort of an answer to the British digestion of blues. And I still believe that if you put the band in there, if you have the band, the Allman Brothers, and Little Feat, that's the triumvirate of how good rock and roll got in America. That's kind of the peak of American rock and roll, is those three bands.
Yep. Excellent response. Right. Scott, I want to drill down a little bit on influences. Because back in 1977, Lowell told me every musician needs a gimmick. And he thought slide guitar was his gimmick. Obviously, he's a great songwriter, singer, but that's what made him stand out. And I know you talk about learning other instruments makes you a better musician. I have your True Fire course, and I know that you spend a lot of time doing standard tuning as opposed to open tuning. Can you talk about maybe, have you done more open tuning since you're doing Little Feat? Maybe how is your technique? Has it adapted, or is it pretty much you've been playing Little Feat all your life and it's just a great fit like a glove?
Well, a great question, Raitt. And again, it brings my whole life full circle. I don't know how I keep hanging out with my heroes, but it just keeps happening. When I started to play guitar, I didn't play slide until, I think, what was the first time I could have been 10 or 11. I saw my first Little Feat and Bonnie Raitt and Allman Brothers shows in one summer. And I decided I wanted to be Paul Barrere, Bonnie, or Lowell. I just fell in love with what they did at that age. And I had a Stratocaster that I tuned to open A, as I read an interview with Bonnie in a guitar magazine about open A and open G. And this was back when VH1 was on, and you could turn it on every time you turned on VH1 in that time. So that's like, 89, 90, it'd be Clapton, Robert Cray, Bonnie Raitt, Dr. John, Allman Brothers. I mean, it'd be like Stevie Ray Vaughan. It'd be all day long. You just turn it on, and it was like, or the radio was the same. I mean, all these great artists were mixed into the normal cultural fabric of the day. Even walking in the pharmacy, you'd hear their music. A lot of people forget the context of how this used to work. This is really important too. You brought up my True Fire course. I do a lot of music education, and with the younger generation, it's almost impossible to describe how important a jam session in a club was, or having a record out was. And that style of playing, I literally had a socket that I got from, I think it was from my dad's toolkit, Sears toolkit, the same socket. And I put it on my finger and started playing with it and tried to imitate the stuff he was doing on Waiting for Columbus when I was about 11, 12. And I stayed with that style all the way up until I was about 20. So the only way I was playing slide was that way from about 11 to 20 years old. And when I got to New York when I was 20, I moved into a 5-floor walk-up in the East Village that coincidentally was across the street from Allen Ginsberg, which was for a kid from the Midwest. That was like the most mind-blowing thing, was that like one of my literary heroes was living across the street. He passed away not long after I moved in. But it was a 5-floor walk-up. And I said, I can't go to gigs down 5 flights into a taxi with a bunch of guitars and amps. When I was in Milwaukee, right before that in high school, when I was gigging all the time, I had my car and I had somewhere to park it. And I would put all the guitars in the back. So I started going to gigs with one guitar. And then I started learning to play slide in standard, and I use lighter strings in standard tuning, and I started to realize that metal was way too heavy to intonate. So I started using a glass bottle, like what Dwayne used to use, a Corsidon. And as it turns out, that set me up for, let's say 9 years later, when I got hired with Gregg Allman, I was playing like his brother in standard tuning because I had just gotten into that out of necessity. And now that I'm playing in Little Feat, the first thing I did last February was I said, I did the gig with the glass slide about 6 times, and I said, I gotta get the metal going on. And I spent my whole pandemic year relearning slide guitar the way I originally learned it.
Very good. Thank you so much. Let me go back to another question that from the Hoy Hoy Digest here. Rick Pritchard asks, how does it feel to be one of the newest members of the band and the chance to add to that already impressive catalog?
All I can say, Red, is I've played 6 gigs with these guys, and I could not wipe the smile off my face. I cannot tell you how much I love their songs and the way they play them. And the fact that the best thing about this band, and Gregg Allman's band was very, very similar to this, is that anything can happen also. So there's this beautiful, perfect combination of songcraft being, the Rosetta Stone of every move, but then this embrace with the live show of the moment where it's almost more of like a jazz approach where it can go in any direction. And the fans, me being one of them, have always been in tune with these types of rock and roll bands. And it's what makes going to the show worth it, is really this kind of live team exploration. And these guys have it now as good as they've ever had it in terms of the spirit. Not having Lowell, I'll be the first one as a lifelong fan of this band to say, Lowell, Richie, and Paul, it's heartbreaking that they are not with us. I can't imagine if all of them had continued on, what incredible things, especially Lowell, who was taken from us in 1979. I was born in 1976, so I didn't even have a chance of seeing him live. That's always in the back of my mind with these guys. It's the spirit of the band is alive and well in the whole musical community, because any musician who's worth their salt is a Little Feat fan. I can tell you that because I've lived in New York City for 24 years, and I've worked with musicians in all kinds of genres of music, and all of them love Little Feat. It's just a universal principle.
Agreed. It's really quite a legacy that you've joined, but you of course bring your history to this legacy as well. And Dave Stone again asks about your solo work. Is there any of your songs that you'd like to do with Little Feat? Should we request them for the By Request tour?
Well, with Little Feat, I'm really focused on a couple things. One is we are going to be playing some songs that you have not heard sung and played live since Lowell was with us. And that's kind of our immediate focus. We have a lot of new original material. Bill Payne's got a lot of great. I know When All Boats Rise came out a few months back, a beautiful song that he wrote a number of years back that finally we recorded it pandemic style, one guy at a time. I can't imagine what's going to happen when we all finally get in a room. But anyway, we're all writing a lot. And I actually finished writing a song with Fred during the pandemic too that's really cool. So that's where my head is at. I see a copy of Let It Roll behind you there. And that record was a very pivotal moment for me because, yes, I grew up on the older records with Lowell, but when that record came out, it was so strong. And they had such a good run of publicity. And like I said, this SNL show I stayed up to watch, and VH1 and their concert tours that I saw, they supported it so well. They played it so well. The songs were so good. Craig was such an amazing vocalist for the band. And it had a real impact on me as a young kid. And I want my main focus, especially going into 2022, as we kind of wind our way out of this pandemic cycle of misery, is to really have a moment like that. That's my main focus. If anybody wants to hear some Scott Sharrard music, hopefully it'll be new stuff that I'm writing to fly the Little Feat flag.
Very good. Well, speaking of that Let It Roll album, I know one of the questions Guy Vickers asked is, you mentioned the Lowell era, but he'd like to hear, and I think he's married to a lovely young lady named Ginger, who is the biggest Craig Fuller fan. So are you planning to do some Craig Fuller songs, or is it really going to be what people request?
Oh, I mean, we have to do stuff off Let It Roll, man. I mean, it's... Hate to Lose Your Lovin'. I'd love to do some other deeper album cuts off that record too. We'll have to talk about it. I mean, we always play Let It Roll. I mean, that's one of the signature songs of the band. Mm-hmm. But there's a number of songs I love on that record. We've done, I played in the 6 shows I did with the band. We did do Cajun Girl one time, and that just gets people up on their feet.
Oh, yeah.
And it's killer.
It's
such a great record. It's such a great record. I mean, it was such a triumph that they pulled that off, and it's something to celebrate. You know.
Very good. Well, I've got to mention Ginger. My wife Amy is she's here, but she's not able to join us at the moment. But she did ask a couple of questions around because I know you're going to be playing with Fred and Kenny as part of Dead Feet on October 9th in Republic in NOLA.
Yeah, that's Anders Osborne's party. We're really excited about it.
Well, of course, you're going to be doing some Grateful Dead songs. And she says, what is your favorite Grateful Dead song, your favorite Allman Brothers song, your favorite Little Feat song, and I've added your favorite Scott Sharrard song?
Wow. Okay. Let me see. Never been a Deadhead per se. I love Jerry Garcia's playing. I love the songs he wrote with Robert Hunter. And my personal favorite song of theirs, Jerry and Robert, is a song called Black Muddy River. And Gregg sang a beautiful version of it. I think he had never heard it, and Don Was brought it to the session. And I'd remembered hearing the song growing up. And that Black Muddy River, man, that's just an absolutely amazing melody and lyric. So I'd have to go with that. I think maybe the Jerry Garcia band recorded that, so I'm not sure. It might be Dead adjacent, but... That band definitely has a number of great songs. And then what's the other one?
Allman Brothers song.
They have so many good songs, and they should be known for it more than, I feel like the Allman Brothers, as loved and adored as they are, the guitar solos have kind of, for some reason, taken over the legacy. Dickie and Gregg wrote so many great tunes. Personal favorite lately, I mean, you could go with any of the obvious ones, which some of the greatest songs of all time, like Midnight Rider, Melissa, Blue Sky is a beautiful song. But my personal favorite of Gregg's, and especially and that he did with the Allman Brothers, that I was trying to get him to do again in our last year, was Win, Lose, or Draw. If you haven't checked that song out in the wild, Johnny Cash could have written that song. It's an amazing, amazing song.
Excellent. And Little Feat song.
Rough question. If I was painted into a corner, Long Distance Love.
I would have thought you had said Fool Yourself, because you did such a great job of that early in the pandemic.
Maybe it's a tie, Fool Yourself is one of my it's one of my favorite songs of all time. So is Long Distance Love. But when I was a teenager, when I had my first romance and heartbreak, it was because of a move that I had to do from Pennsylvania to Wisconsin. And that song was the soundtrack to that move when I was 14 years old.
So I'll interject, since you mentioned that song. My first listen to anything that you've done was I was lucky enough to get an early version of the recording you guys did, the pandemic recording, and was asked, hey, listen to this and play it. I was told I could play it for some friends, but nobody can have the copy, of course. And my neighbors, who are dear friends of mine and have a Hoy Hoy license plate, so I knew I was in the right neighborhood, came over one night, and we're eating boudin and gumbo. And I said, hey, I want you to listen to this, because they're big Little Feat fans. And we sat on my front porch on a warm, balmy night, listened to it. And I look over, and she's got tears coming down her face. And I was really close to that too. In fact, that was all I needed. And it was such a beautiful treatment in that song. And you know, you mentioned earlier in at the top of the discussion that some of the songs like that there's nuance in there, and you know, like the Richie thing where he's playing all these ghost and grace notes, but you feel them, but you can't hear them, but they're sort of there. He's moving his arm, but he's not really hitting anything. And Tony did a great job. I was thrilled to see that he was on board and holding things down and keeping the legacy of great Little Feat drummers going. But I wanted to pass that on because it was, and afterward I looked over and my neighbor says, it's like Lowell's just passing it on. Vocally, just the way that you treated it was just brilliant.
Well, thanks so much, man. I can't tell you how much that means to me, because I know that Little Feat fans aren't easy customers, because as I've said before, I'm one of them. So you can trust one thing coming from me. I mean, I had to stand next to Gregg Allman and play guitar for 9+ years, and that's, you know, I was a kid in the audience watching the Allman Brothers and Gregg Allman and Little Feat, and I think about what I would have thought about some random guy getting up there when I was 14 or something, and how harsh I would have been about it. I'm my own biggest critic, so it means a lot to hear that from the fans, because I'm working really hard on this. I still, you know, as a musician, I've never taken anything for granted. I mean, I still, even having 2 little kids, and I have just an amazing family that supports me, but I still, you know, get up every day and run and practice, and like, I don't take a single moment for granted. And for me, it's like getting to perform this music is such a privilege. And the best thing about the Long Distance Love video was when Bill Payne passed along a note from Bonnie Raitt that she had seen it, and then she loved it, and she said some complimentary things about me, and that was like, for me, that was the most amazing gift to have that, because that was like during, you know, the summer of 2022. So, you know, we're all sitting around going, you know, what, am I even a musician anymore? And that, you know, to get that note was like, to get that note about that performance, which I had to sing in my friend's basement and engineer myself in May of 2020, you know, to get that note from Bonnie Raitt about the track and the compliment towards my performance was just an absolutely amazing moment.
Excellent. Well, we're all grateful for you keeping it all alive. And I know you're preparing for the live stream on September 20th. And I believe you're doing that in Nashville. Can you give us maybe a hint of some of the songs you're working on for that? Or you don't know the set list yet? Or what does Bill have planned for us? He's doing the set list now, right?
Of course. Yeah. Bill is just an amazing band leader. You know, and I just love his style, because it does we have a lot of things to prepare. So there's a long list of songs we're learning. But I have a feeling that the streaming show, we're gonna rehearse for a few days. First time we played together with Tony Leone. Okay. First time we played together with all the guys since February 2020 at Feat Camp. So there's gonna be a few days of like getting the mechanics back together and bringing Tony's vibe in. And I have a feeling that with Bill, you know, we'll take the master list and we'll kind of hone in on what's gelling. And then I'm not sure. I think the by request thing starts when we tour in November. Don't hold me to that. Maybe we're going to do some for the stream. I don't know. We have a great management team on board from Vector, and they're just, I can't tell you how excited I am about working with these guys. And that is not something I would say about a manager usually. They're really exceptional, and I think exceptionally the right people to have with us. And I've never been so excited to work with music business professionals before. And they're coming up with all these great ideas and schemes and helping Bill with his ideas and bouncing things off all of us. So I'm sure we'll come up with a great show. And we've been talking about the concept of having special guests on the streaming show. So there's been some names thrown around. I mean, you know, you can use your imagination. We're in Nashville, so it depends on who's home. Mm-hmm. So we'll see. I think it's going to be mandatory viewing. I mean, even if I wasn't in the band, I would be watching it, because it's been so long since the band's played, and I think the production of this thing is going to be really cool.
Excellent. Well, as it happens, I'm going to be in the Northeast, not around Nashville or South Carolina for the stream, but I will catch it. But while I'm up there, and maybe I should just ask this for fans. I know Billy's going to be on the road with Doobies, and hopefully we'll spend a lot more time with Little Feat next year. But when you're not playing with Little Feat and you've got Scott Sharrard band shows, why don't you tell the people who are watching this video where they can go to find out about Scott Sharrard shows?
Well, I always like to say, Raitt, if you know how to spell my name, you know how to find me. But spelling my name is a challenge. So Scott Sharrard, ScottSharrard.com, ScottSharrard.com. And we just, my new album, Rust Belt, is coming out first week of September. I named it Rust Belt because it's a lot of songs about sort of my origin story. I spent a lot of time touring in the Midwest with my band in 2017-18 and having a lot of reflections about this sort of course, the political climate we were in 17 and 18, and just the sense of impending doom, and then the doom arriving in 2020. The album couldn't help but be informed by the times we're in, but also I was reflecting a lot on my personal and musical upbringing, which was, I say, the Rust Belt, because even though I'm from Michigan, I was raised in Pennsylvania, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. The only thing they all have in common is they're in the Rust Belt. So that's kind of the theme of the record. And it's the best batch of songs I've ever written, without a doubt. And Bill Payne is featured on 2 songs on the record.
Excellent.
And so is Amy Helms. She's singing on like 3 tracks, who's obviously a good friend of the Feet, and an old and dear friend of mine. And that's coming out first week of September. We're playing a show at Levon Helms Studios in Woodstock on Saturday, September 11th. I'm calling the band that night the Rust Belt Choir, because it is going to be a multi-generational 10 or 12 piece band of musicians added to my 4-piece core band. And we're going to be featuring some young people singing and playing, and then we're going to play the Rust Belt album front to back with them. We're going to have a bunch of different local talent from the Hudson Valley. I won't drop anyone's name because we're all getting back to work around here, and I don't want to F with anyone's ticket sales, but there'll be a bunch of friends. There'll be a bunch of friends from the area coming down to sing a tune and hang out. It's going to be a big family affair. The great James Maddock is opening, who's one of my favorite singer-songwriters. I feel so lucky to have him there. So that's really our biggest show. But we have a bunch of shows coming up that you can find on ScottSharrard.com. Just working around the Little Feat stuff for now. Next year, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with my own thing. I mean, I'm going to tell you, Reddit, I'll spill the beans a little bit here in a wide way. Little Feat is going to be on the road a lot next year. And we're going to be playing some very, very special themed shows. And we're going to be coming to your town, wherever you are. Hopefully in the world, definitely in the United States. You're in great shape. If you like Little Feat, you're going to see us next year.
That's great, because I know there's been a lot of people asking when they've seen the current tour schedule, when are you coming to my town? But
trust me, I have a Google Calendar now with this band, and it's every once in a while I'll get a message from somebody like, "Did you see this?" And I'll go and I'll be like, "Oh my God, I'm going to be gone for this many weeks." So I'm really, really, really excited about it.
Very good. Well, I appreciate all your time, Larry. Did you have any last questions before we wrap it up here?
I had seen, speaking of Scott Sharrard gigs, I was looking on the website, and I was looking, and it looks like you're doing some small shows with or featuring music of Grant Green.
A major influence. I first became aware of Grant Green when I was in my early teens. I read an interview with Stevie Ray Vaughan in, I think it was Guitar Player magazine, and they asked him what he was listening to, and he mentioned 2 albums. He mentioned Donny Hathaway Live and Grant Green Alive. And I had never heard of these artists or records. And it took me 2 years to find Grant Green Alive. But that Grant Green Alive, when I found that, it didn't even have the original cover. It had a plain white sleeve, and someone had scratched in Sharpie the name of it on the front. Bought it for $5 at a used record store. I went home and put it on, And I had been trying to sound like a saxophone on the guitar my whole life. And I put it on, and he started playing the solo. And I said, oh my God, this is the guy who did it. This sounds like a saxophone on the, it sounds like my biggest influences, Maceo Parker, King Curtis, Junior Walker. You know, it had that time feel and tone and, you know, minimalism and just funk. And I just went after it, man. And Alive is a funk record. It's 5 killer funk tracks. So I just decided a couple of years ago for fun, my friend has this bar, Richard Julian, also a great singer-songwriter who worked with Norah Jones and is just phenomenal talent himself. He owns a bar called Bar Lunatico in Brooklyn. And I went one night to see a friend play, and I said, this is the most incredible place in New York. I mean, it's like being in New Orleans, but you're in Brooklyn. And I said to Richard, I said, I got to play here, but I got to think of something to do. I can't bring my rock band in here. It's this tiny little place. So I decided to put this group together and try it. We did it, and it just turned immediately into a dance party. And one night we were doing it, we did it as a series of shows, and one night we were doing it, and I looked at the bar, and there's a guy shaking his head, and he comes closer to the bandstand, and we took a break. It was Stanley Banks, George Benson's bass player. Man. And Stanley used to go see this band all the time. And he said to me, he bought the band a round of drinks, and he said, thank you for doing this. And I said, Stanley, I mean, I'm so glad you enjoyed it, but why thank you? And he said, this is what Grant Green would have wanted. He used to play these shows and 3 people would be there. And we all thought he was like the next Jimi Hendrix, and no one ever got it. And he's like, you're playing a packed club, all these people are young, and you're keeping his music alive. And then he sent a recording or a video of us playing it to Ronnie Foster, who played organ on the records. And then I got a message from Ronnie saying, you guys are doing an amazing job, keep it up. And I said, I got to do more of these gigs. So we do a few of them a year, and we usually do them at this little bar in Brooklyn. And now I'm getting promoters and people asking me to come do it out of town. So I guess we're going to do more of it. I know that Fred Tackett and Sam Clayton, when I joined Little Feat, they were watching videos of it on YouTube. They're big fans of the band. But it's a funky good time, man. It's not a jazz show. Like we get up there, we play, and we don't let up. I stole from Maceo Parker the saying, 2% jazz, 98% funky stuff. That's what you get when you come see that band. And the band's called Green is Beautiful, which is named after one of his records. People have been trying to entice us to come play more. I'll see what we can do. The only problem I have with Green is Beautiful right now is that the band is playing, Grant mostly, I would say 90% of his funk catalog is cover songs that he was covering and arranging in his own style. So the thing we're kind of up against is I've actually been approached by labels to do an album, but the problem is more a material thing. Like at some point, if I'm going to continue to do that project, I have to decide, am I going to write a bunch of songs inspired by this stuff, which is probably what's next, because, to do a record of these covers that he did would be financially impossible for any small label.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. We'll look for that. And of course, we're going to be watching scottsharrard.com and littlefeat.net. I know I'm looking forward to actually saying hello on November 11th. I'll be up at Port Chester when the tour starts.
Wow.
And, along with my wife and my son, Reed Miller, who is a jazz guitar player in Brooklyn. So we've got to get you all to say hello, because he's been a Little Feat fan forever. I don't know if did you catch the All That You Dream lesson that we put up on YouTube?
Oh no, you got to share it. Email that over to me, Red. I'd love to see it.
It's based on Paul Barrere actually showed me how he played the song. So I'll get that.
I actually need to see that.
Very good. So we'll get that over to you. And once again, I just want to thank you. This is, I think, a great way to make up for my mistake in March, not pressing the record button.
It still says record, Red. I think we're good.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, guys. It was great to hang with you.
Good to meet you, Scott.
Yeah, cheers. Have a great day.
Thanks.